Hey guys, welcome to my Vue JS Crash Course for 2021. So this is an update from my 2019 version, and we're going to be going over all the fundamentals of Vue JS by first building a very small project using just the Vue CDN, and then we'll jump into using the CLI to scaffold out a larger task tracker application. And if you watch my React Crash Course that I did about a month ago, it's the same exact application that I built in that video, except we're using Vue instead of React. Now we are using version 3 of Vue.js, however, just about everything that we do here also applies to version 2, with the exception of a couple small things. We're not going to be covering the composition API in this video, however, I will do a separate video for that. Alright, so we're just going to look at some slides for a few minutes and then we'll jump in and get started. So first of all, what is Vue.js? It's a front-end JavaScript framework for building websites and user interfaces, very similar to React and Angular. In fact, Vue, React, and Angular are basically the biggest front-end JavaScript frameworks that are used right now. And Vue is generally used to create single-page apps or SPAs that run on the client, but it can be paired with back-end technologies like Node.js, Python, PHP, C#, basically anything that can run on the server to create, powerful full-stack applications. Vue can also run on the server side by using the Nuxt server-side rendered framework, which is similar to Next for React. So why use Vue over, let's say, vanilla JavaScript? And some of these are relative to all front-end frameworks because they do a lot of the same thing, but they allow you to create dynamic and interactive front-end applications and websites. Out of React, Angular, and Vue, which are the big three, I think that Vue has the easiest learning curve. With React, you have a lot of specific terminology that you need to learn, where Vue, in my opinion, is closer to just being structured JavaScript. Vue is easy to integrate into other projects. You can simply include the CDN right in your HTML and you can create specific Vue components or elements for your website. It's a fast and very lightweight framework. It uses a virtual DOM, much like React, where it only updates things on the page that need to be updated rather than refreshing the entire page. And it is very popular. I wouldn't say it's as popular as React, but it seems to gain more traction every year. It also has a great community. With React, you have Facebook behind it, you have Google behind Angular. Vue.js doesn't have a large corporation behind it, and it's still able to be, one of the top three contenders for front-end frameworks. Now, as far as what you should know before learning Vue.js, I'd say just about the same that you should learn before any front-end framework, and that's JavaScript. And obviously HTML and maybe a little bit of CSS. So you want to know the fundamentals of JavaScript. You're going to deal a lot with asynchronous programming, so it's important to know how to work with things like promises. Array methods are really important, like for each and map and filter. Regardless of framework, or even in vanilla JavaScript, you're going to work with these a lot. In many cases, you're going to be dealing with some kind of API, some kind of back end to make requests to. So it's important to understand HTTP requests and the fetch API. You should also have experience with NPM because you're going to be installing other packages to give you extra functionality, or NPM or Yarn. Alright, so this is the app we'll be building. Again, if you took the React Crash Course, it's the same exact application. And what I've done is on the right here, I've outlined all the components because when you're using a front-end framework, you want to think of your user interface in terms of different components. The search bar, the nav bar, whatever it might be, it's going to be a separate component. So in this case, we have the header outlined in orange, so that's the header component. We have a button component here, and these are all reusable. We can add props, so for instance, we could create a button here and then put another one somewhere else and maybe have a color prop to make it a different color, a text prop so it displays different text. So these are reusable components. Then we have the AddTask component in green, which is the form, and this button will toggle this form. And then down here we have the tasks component wrapped around all the tasks, and then each individual task is also its own component. All right, and then we have a footer that just has a link to the About page. So towards the end of the crash course, we're going to be looking at the Vue router and how you can, have different routes in your application. So in the code, a Vue component looks something like this. You have three separate areas. You have your template, which is basically your output, your HTML. Here you can have HTML tags, you can have expressions and variables using declarative rendering. Then we have our JavaScript, our logic. From here, you can declare props, you can declare specific data that is linked to your component, you can have methods and so on. You can hook into lifecycle methods as well. And then you have your style, and you can add this scoped to your style. And if you have that, that means that anything in here is only going to pertain to this specific component. So in this case, this is only going to style this header tag. Any other header tag on the page isn't going to get styled. And then to actually embed the component, you would do it like this, so pretty much like an XML tag, and you could pass in props just like you would pass in an HTML attribute. So we have a title getting passed in, and then we define it here, and we could use it up here. All right, so that's just a very simple example, but we'll be getting more into this as we move along. So like I said, components can have data or state associated with them, which will determine how specific components behave and what data is displayed. So data can be local to a component, or it can be global or app level, where it's shared with multiple components. And there's different ways to handle app level state. If you have a lot of app level state or data, you might want to use something like Vuex, which is a state manager that is similar to Redux. So if you have a large application where you have maybe products, categories, users, and a bunch of different resources, you probably want to use something like Vuex. Now, Vue 3 has a new composition API, which aims to address code reusability and readability. Traditionally, components use what's called the options API. That's what we're going to be using here. Although, like I said, I will be doing a separate video on the composition API. And then finally, I just want to talk about the Vue CLI, which is the standard tooling for Vue.js development. It's a command line interface to scaffold projects. It has its own GUI Vue manager. If you want to use that, it's completely optional, but that is offered. It has a dev server and an easy production build tool. It has integrated testing, TypeScript support, Vuex support. So this is what we'll be using to set up our task tracker project. All right, so enough with the slides. Let's go ahead and jump in and learn Vue.js. All right, so like I said, we're going to start off with a pretty simple project. We're going to create a random user generator, and we're just going to use the Vue CDN. And then later on, we'll move on to our task tracker application, where we'll set everything up with the Vue CLI. So this is the Vue.js website. Right now, for version 3, you need to go to v3.vuejs.org, but in the future, this will be the landing page for just vuejs.org. Right now, if you were to go there, it's going to be the version 2 documentation with a link up here to go to version 3. All right, so if we go to, let's say, Get Started, and let's click on Installation, you'll see that it'll give us a link to the CDN. So this Vue at next is going to be whatever the latest version is. Right now, I believe it's 3.0.5. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this, and I'm going to open up VS Code, and I just have a folder here called Random User Gen, and it has 3 files. It has an index.html, which is empty, an app.js, which is empty, and then a style CSS with just some basic styles here. And I'll have the code pen for this small project in the description if you want to grab the CSS and follow along. So in the index.html, let's just go ahead and create a boilerplate, and for the title, we'll say Random User Generator. And then I'm going to add my link to my style sheet. And then down here in the body, let's go ahead and paste in the CDN. Now, like I said, this is going to give you whatever the latest version is. I'm going to specify 3.0.5. And then I'm going to add my script tag to my app.js file as well. And then in the body, all I'm going to have here is a div with the ID of app. Okay, so I'm going to save that. And basically, if you've ever worked with a front-end framework, or I should say a single page application, everything we do as far as creating components, creating our UI is going to be within the JavaScript, and then that loads and it basically spits it out here. It's output into this div. All right, so we're going to jump into our app.js file now, and we're going to create a variable called app, and we're going to set this to Vue, so capital V, UE, and we have access to this object because of the CDN. And then we're going to call create app. Okay, and then this takes in an object, and we can pass in different things here, such as a template. So for now, I'm just going to put an h1 in here, and we'll just say hello world. And then if we want to mount this app to that div that I put in the HTML, we can simply do app.mount and then just pass in whatever the selector, in our case it's going to be the ID of app. So I'm going to save this, and now I'm going to open this file. I'm going to open it with live server, but you can just open it on your, on your file system if you want. And you'll see we get hello world. So it's putting out what we have in the template here. Now, in this case, we're just kind of using, we're using the CDN. You would do, if you want to build a small project with Vue, you could do it this way. We're not going to have multiple components or anything. We'll get into that with the task application. But we can add data. So if we go right here, now data is going to be a function, and it needs to return an object. Okay, and I remember when I started learning Vue, I used to do this, data like as an object, but you just want to remember that it's going to be a function that returns an object. And let's say in here, we'll say first name, and we'll set that to John. And then up here in our template, we can use that with declarative rendering, and we do that with double curly braces. So it's similar to, if you're familiar with React, it's similar to interpolation in React with single curly braces, except with Vue it's going to be double, and we can just output first name. So if I save that, you can see we get hello John. Now we could do everything right here in the template, but we can also just take this. So I'll cut that, and we'll just get rid of the template here. And then we'll go into our HTML, and as long as we're within this div with the ID of app, we can go ahead and we can use any data we have in our Vue app. So you can see it's still spitting out first name. Now if I were to put that down here, see it renders down here, and it doesn't actually give us the first name, it just gives us the literal characters. So it has to be within this main app div, because that's what we mounted this to. All right, so let's actually add some more data here. I'm just going to grab real quick, just copy it. So we have a first name, last name, we have an email, gender, and then picture. And we're using the randomuser.me API for this. So we have some data. Let's go to our index.html, and let's take, we'll get rid of this here, and let's just do first name, and then we'll do last name. So we get John Doe. Under that, let's put in H3. We'll say email colon, and then we'll put in the email. And then we're going to have a button. And for the button, I'm going to say get random user. And we're not going to deal with the button just yet. I want to show you if we want to put the image in, right? So we have this picture value, which is this URL, which is an image to some guy. And I want that as the source value here. And you might think we can do something like this picture. You can do that in React, but we can't do that here in Vue. We have to use something called the vbind directive. So instead of just source, we would do v-bind and then colon and then source. And we don't need to have these these curly braces. So it would just be picture, and this is gonna be the dynamic variable because we're using vbind. So if I save that, you'll see it'll actually use the picture URL as the value here. Now let's say we want to put the name as the alt value. We can do the same thing here, so we can say vbind colon alt, and in here we can put first name. And if we go ahead and open up the dev tools here and go to elements, let's make this a little bigger here, and so you can see, where is it? Div with the ID of app, image, and the alt is the first name. Now, if we want to have the first name and last name, what we can do in here is add in backticks. So just like a JavaScript template literal, and we can add money sign, curly braces around the first name. We can put a space, and then we can have the last name. And now if we look at the alt, it should be John Doe. Now with this vbind, there's actually a shortcut. You don't have to type out vbind, you could just have the colon. All right, so if I save that, you can see it's going to do the same thing, and it's going to render John Doe as the alt. So this is the syntax we'll be using, but I'm going to leave this here just so you can see both versions. All right, now let's see. We know that we have in our data, we have gender, in this case is male, and in my style sheet I have a male class and a female class. So the male class has this steel blue border color, background color. Female has the pink border background and then the dark text color. So what I want to do here is basically just add a binding to the class of both the image and the button, and it'll be, you know, blue for male, pink for female, and I hope nobody gets offended by that. I just couldn't think of anything else to demonstrate this with. So to do that, we want to use a class, but we want to vbind to it. So we want to just add a colon in front of it, and then we can just set that to gender, because remember that's part of our data, right? So that's right here. So it's going to put that in that class. And then we'll do the same thing for the button, like that. And if I save, now you'll see we have a blue outline on the image and we have a blue background color on the button. And if I were to go over here and let's change this to female, it's going to turn pink. Okay. Now I want to be able to click this button and change the user, get a random user. So we're now going to look at events. And everything that I'm doing here, we're going to use in the task tracker application as well. I just wanted to do something really simple first and show you that you don't have to set up tooling and all that just to use Vue.js for something simple. Now this button here, we're going to add an event to, so we can do that. There's actually a couple ways. The first way I'm going to show you is with v.on and then whatever the event, in this case click. And we can set that to, let's say, get user. So this is going to call a method within our app called getUser. So let's save that. Let's go to app.js. And the way that we define methods, we can go right under where we have our data and say methods. And we can say getUser. And for now, let's do a console log. Now in this method, we can access any of our data in here with the this keyword. So we can say this dot first name. All right, so we'll go ahead over here and open up our console, and if I click this, you'll see I'm going to get John. All right, so pretty easy, pretty clean and structured. What I want to do though is change these values to something else. So let's see. I guess we'll copy these, and let's change. Now to access these, we have to use this. So we'll say this dot first name. And we'll set that equal to, let's say, I don't know, Sam. Get rid of these commas too. So Smith and last name. So this dot last name. Let's do this dot email is going to equal sam@gmail. And we'll make Sam female. And set this to this dot gender, and then we want this dot picture, and let's set that equal to, get rid of this comma, and we'll just change men to women. All right, so when we click this, all of this data should change to this data. So let's click, and there we go. All right, now obviously it's always gonna be this user. So what I'd like to do is use the random user API to get a random user, to get random user data every time we click this and set this data to that. All right, so what we can do is, let's go right above where we set all this data inside getUser, and I'm gonna be using the fetch API with async await. So we wanna just make sure that we mark this as an asynchronous function, and then let's say const res, so response, we want to await on fetch, and here the URL is https, it's going to be random user.me/API. All right, so then we want to put in a variable, we can get the data from let's say await res.json, so that's going to give us the JSON data. Now what it gives us back is a results array with just a single item with a single user by default. So I'm just going to, instead of putting it in data, let's destructure results, and we'll pull that out. And then we'll just go ahead and console log and see what results gives us. Okay, so let's go ahead and open this up and get random user, and down here you can see it's logging an array with just one item in it. And this item has all this data, all this random data. We have the cell number, date of birth, email, gender, name, which is an object with first, last, and title. We have picture, which is an object with large, medium, and thumbnail. So I just want to set this, instead of setting it to this static data, we'll set it to our results. So here for the first name, we'll set it to results. We want the first item in the array, and we want name as an object, and we want the first name. Okay, and then for here, let's say results, and we want first item, name dot last, and then whoops, and then we have results, and we want the email, so that's just dot email, and then let's say results, gender, and then for picture, let's get rid of this. So picture is going to be an object as well. So let's say we want the first item, and then in the picture object we want the, let's get the large. Okay, you can see that over here. Actually, I'll just comment that out, and let's save. And now if we come over here and we click, we should get a random user. And you can see automatically if it's a female, it's going to change color. And there we go. All right, so very simple project, but I just wanted to demonstrate how easy it is just to, throw the CDN in there and use Vue.js. So now we're going to jump in and we're going to set up our task tracker application with the Vue CLI. Okay, so we're going to start on our task tracker application now. This is the CLI documentation. It's cli.vuejs.org if you want to check that out. If we go to get started and we go to installation, we do need to install this globally either with npm or yarn. So let's go ahead and open up our terminal, and we're going to do, I'm on a Mac, so I'm going to run sudo since this is global, we're installing this. So npm install -g, and then you want to do at Vue/CLI. Alright, so now that that's all set, we basically have two options here. We can run Vue create and just create our application, which is what we're going to do, but you also have the option to run Vue UI, and I just want to show you what that does. So this will actually start up a graphical user interface where we can manage our Vue projects. So you would see your projects here. You can create a new project in a directory. Then you can install plugins. You can install Vuex, the router, and so on. You can import projects. So I'm not going to use this, but I just wanted to show you that it is available if you do want to use it. So I'm going to cut that off, close that up, and we're going to go ahead and run Vue create, and just whatever you want to call this, I'm going to call it Vue Crash 2021. And it's going to ask us some questions. So at this point in time, we can choose if we want Vue version 2, version 3. We can also manually select features, which is what I'm going to do just to show you what is offered here. So I'm going to keep this selected, choose Vue version. And by the way, if you're using Windows with the Git Bash terminal, you might have some issues with the arrows, so you might have to use PowerShell or something like that. I'm not sure if that's still a thing, but I know it was at one point. Babel, we're going to keep that. TypeScript, if you wanted to use it, you could just hit space and check it. PWA support. The router, now usually if you're going to use the router, I would definitely suggest selecting it here and just get it set up. However, we're not going to select it because we're not going to do the router till the end, and I'm going to show you how to set it up manually. Vuex, which is a global state manager, CSS preprocessors like Sass, you have built-in linting and formatting. I'm going to actually uncheck that for this, and then unit testing and end-to-end testing. So I'm going to leave all these empty and just hit enter. And now we can choose if we want Vue 2 or 3. I'm going to choose 3. And I'm going to choose for dedicated config files. And I don't want to save it as a preset. So that'll go ahead and set everything up. Okay, so that's all set. Let's go ahead and just clear this up. And I'm going to cd into my Vue Crash folder here. And then I'm just going to open VS Code in this folder. So on the side here, you can see all of our files and folders. If we look at our package.json, I chose pretty much the bare minimum, so there's not much here. We just have Vue, some CLI stuff, and we have two scripts. We have npm run serve, which will run our dev server, and npm run build will build out our static assets for deployment, so when you're ready to deploy. And then if we look at actually, you know what, let's run the dev server. So I'm going to open up my integrated terminal and just run npm run serve, not server, but just serve. And that's going to run it on localhost port 8080. So let's say HTTP localhost, and it's going to be port 8080 by default. Okay, so this is what it's going to give us, just a basic landing page here. Let me just make this a little smaller. And now we'll look at some of these files. So our public folder, we're not really going to need to do anything with, but this index.html is the single page that's loaded in the browser. And down here you can see there's a div with the ID of app. So everything is going to be spit out here, kind of like when we use the CDN. And the way that happens is in our source folder, there's this main.js, and this is like the entry point to Vue. So we're importing create app, we're importing that method from Vue, and then we're also importing our root app component, which is in app.vue. And down here we're calling create app and passing in the main app component, and we're mounting it to that div with the ID of app. Okay, so that's basically the entry point. Then we have our app.vue, which is it's like our root component. So everything we do, you know, is going to basically go through this file for now. Any components we create, we're going to embed in here. And you can see it has the three parts like I showed you in the slide. There's a template, which is the output, the HTML. There's the script, which is the logic, the JavaScript, and then we have the styling. All right, now here what's happening is we're importing this hello world component, which I'm going to delete in a second, but I'm just showing you that we're importing that. And when you want to use a component, you have to define it in here or register it in this components object. Then you can just pass it in up here, and this happens to take in a message prop that's being passed in. If we look at the hello world component, you'll see it's basically just a bunch of text. It's everything you see down here, and it's outputting this message prop, which is actually defined down here. Okay, so whenever you pass in a prop, it needs to be defined here. We're going to do all this stuff on our own. I'm just showing you the boilerplate. And then there's some scoped styling. All right, so what we're going to do is actually delete the hello world component. We don't need that. It's going to go ahead and break because we're importing it. So let's get rid of this import, and then we'll get rid of right here where we register it. And let's get rid of, let's see, up here, I'm going to get rid of the image too. And for now, we'll just put, let's put an H1 and say hello world. Now, if you want to use Emit, you see how, you know, Emit works in here. If it doesn't work, just go to your settings. Let's do a Command-Shift-P and just type in settings and go to your JSON file and just add this right here. So Emit included languages, and then these two lines. All right, so that will enable Emit in your Vue templates. And another thing I would suggest is installing the Viter extension if you're using VS Code. So this will give you some highlighting and stuff like that. There's other ones as well. There's a Vue 3 snippets extension that I started using on my other machine. But right now all I have for Vue is as far as extensions is this here. All right, so as far as the styling goes, I mean, there's different ways you can do it. You can just have one single global style sheet. You can put all your global styles down here, or all your styles, or you could break it up into components. So I have some global styles I'm going to put in here. I'm just going to get rid of this and paste in. So basically it's just, you know, I'm bringing in the Poppins font, a reset, a container class, and some button classes. And you can grab this from the repo if you're following along. So we'll go ahead and save that. And then the container I'm going to wrap around. Let's go up here and say container and move this into here. That'll just push everything to the middle and give us this border around it. So I want to start to create some components. In the components folder, let's create a file called header.vue. So capital H header.vue. And in here, we're going to have our template. And let's have a header tag with an H1. We'll say task tracker. And then for the script tag, let's go ahead and export a default object. And we'll give this a name of header, and that's all I want to put for now. So we'll add some styling, just a little bit, and we're going to scope this. So we want to say scoped. That means anything in here is only going to be for this component. So this header tag will only be for this specific component. And we're going to display flex because we are going to have a button to toggle the add form. So display flex, let's go ahead and justify content to space between, and we'll go ahead and align our items to the center, and let's add a margin bottom of 20 pixels. And then I want to bring this into our app.vue. So right above the export, let's add the importing header from, and that's going to be ./component/header. And then we're going to register that component here. So make sure you add header here, and then we can go ahead and embed it. We'll replace this h1 with our header, save, and now we get our task tracker, which is coming from here. Now let's talk a little bit about props, because you can pass props into a component. Like let's say we want to pass in a title here, and we'll just say hello for now. And then if we want to work with this title inside of our header component, we need to define down here props. And there's a few ways you can define them. One is just to have an array with the prop name. And then up here, let's replace this with our double curly braces, and in here we'll say title. If we do that, you can see that it renders hello. I'm just going to change that hello now to task tracker. And then if you want, you can also define your props as an object. So we can say title, and you can specify a specific type, so string. So you see that'll work as well. Another thing you can do, if you want to take it a step further and have a default value, you can add an object with the type, and then you can add a default, which let's just say we don't need a default, but we'll say hello world just to show you how this works. And now if I get rid of this prop that I passed in, the default is going to show, which is hello world. Okay, we don't actually need that. I just wanted to show you we can do that. So I'm going to go back to this format. All right, now I want to have a button over here that will toggle the add task form when we get to it, and I want to have a button as a component so we can add multiple buttons with different text and colors. You don't have to do that. We could just go ahead and put a regular button in here, but let's go ahead and make it a component. So I'm going to go over here to components, create a new file called button.vue. And let's give this a template, and in the template we're going to have button. For now we'll say add task, and then we'll add our script tag, and let's go ahead and export default, give this a name of button, and just do that for now, and we'll just go ahead and bring that into our header file. So down here, let's say import button from, that's in the same folder, so just /button. We have to register it as a component, so let's say components and button, and then we're going to put that right under the h1 here. So button, oops, we want capital B because it's a component, not just a button tag. Now to style this, remember in the app.vue I do have these button styles, btn. So let's actually, we'll just add that class here. So class equals btn, make it look a little better. Now as far as the text and the color, I want to be able to pass those in as props like this. So we'll say text equals, say add task, and we'll say color equals green. And then we need to handle those in our button. So let's go ahead and define props, and we'll use an object here. We'll say the text, which is going to be a string, and then the color, which is also a string. And then we can go up here and let's add right here double curly braces, and we can put our text prop here. Now for the color, we're going to add inline style, but we're going to bind it, so we need to use either vbind colon or just colon, and then let's add style, and we want to set this to, it's going to be the background color, so I'm going to set the background to the color prop. So we'll save that. Now you can see that it's rendering green. Now if I wanted to have another button or a few of them, we could do that. We could change this to, like, I don't know, update task and have that to be blue. We could do another button to delete task. If I save that, now you can see we have these different button components, so these are reusable, and we can pass in different text and colors. Now, as far as the event, as far as the event for this button, like I said, it's going to be toggling the AddTask component, but we're not creating that till later. But we will just add an event now, just to have it and just log to the console. So inside of button.view, let's go ahead and add an event. Now, when we did the smaller project, I showed you we could do v.on click, and we could set this to a function. I'll just say on click. So that's one way to do it, but another way, instead of v.on or v-on, instead of that directive, you can just do at. So we can say at click. That'll do the same thing. And then let's define our methods down here, and we'll have an on click, and this is going to be a method. And for now, let's just console log here, and we'll just say click, just to show you that that works. So if I click that, we should see that log. Now I'm going to put this on hold for a little bit because we don't have the component to toggle the add task. What I want to do now is just get some tasks listed out here. All right, now as far as data, as far as where we're going to put our data, usually it's going to come from some kind of API, some kind of backend, and later on we're actually going to implement something called JSON-Server, which is like a fake REST API, a fake backend that we can use and we can make requests to. For now, we're just going to kind of put the data in the app.vue file. We are going to have a tasks component, but we don't want to put the data in there because we want to access the tasks from other components as well. And since we're not using something like Vuex for state management, we want our state to be in the top level component here, which is app.vue. Okay, so let's go down into the JavaScript here, and let's add data. Remember, data is going to be a function that returns an object, and we're going to have tasks. Now I could put the tasks in here. However, I don't want to do that. I actually want to use what's called a lifecycle method. And if you're familiar with React, you're probably familiar with these. Basically, when a component is loaded, it goes through a specific lifecycle where there's certain methods or functions that are fired off that you can actually hook into, and you can do specific things at specific times. So the hook, or the lifecycle method that I want to use is created. So this is commonly where you'll make HTTP requests. If you want to load some data when your page or your component loads, you would put it in the created lifecycle method. So let's go right under data. We'll put a comma here, and let's say created, and this is going to be a method. And in here we have access to this .tasks. So we defined tasks here, but we just defined it as an empty array. So when created runs, that's where we're actually going to fill this. Typically we would make a request, but for now we're just going to hard code them right in here. All right, so you can see I have 3 tasks. They each have an ID, a text value, a day, and a reminder. Okay, so this is like if you want to set a reminder, it's a true or false value. So now that data is going to come in. And what we want to do now is have a task component to pass this data into so we can render it on the page. So let's go into components. Let's create a file called tasks.vue, and we'll add our template. So basically all I want to do here is to take in a prop of tasks, take in the array, and then loop through them, and then output a single task component for each one. So what we'll do here is, let's see, let's add our script down here first, because we want to take in the tasks array as a prop. So we'll say export default, and we'll say name tasks, and then we're going to have props, and we're going to take in tasks, which is going to be an array. All right, and if we go back to our app.vue, let's bring that tasks in, and we want to register it here, tasks, and then all we have to do is go up here. We'll go under the header and say tasks. Now since we're passing in an array here, which is going to be dynamic. It's basically, if it changes, we want it to get sent down into tasks. So we're going to vbind tasks to the tasks data. Okay, so we'll save that. We'll go back here. Now we want to basically loop through those tasks, and we can do that by creating a div. And inside here, we're going to have a v-4 directive. And that's basically how we can create a list, or we can loop through and output something. So in this v-4, let's say for each task in tasks, then we want to output something. In this case, let's just do an h3 for now, and we'll have access to each individual task. And of course, the data that comes along with it. We'll just put the text for now. Now, if I save that, it's going to work. We're going to see all of our text, our task text in H3s. We do have this error here, or warning. It tells us that elements in an iteration expect to have a vbind key directive. So just like with React, when you create a list, you have to have a unique key. We have to do the same thing here. So you have to vbind a key, and it has to be unique. So let's go ahead and just use the task.id for that. And that warning should go away. Now, instead of just outputting an H3 here, I want it to be a specific task component. So let's create another component called task.view. And this is what I mean about breaking your UI up into specific components. So we'll have our template, and then we'll have our script. And let's go ahead and export. All right, now as far as props, this is going to take in an individual task. So for props, let's say task, and that's going to be an object. So we'll define that as an object. And for now, let's just put an H3 here, and we should have access to that specific task, and we'll do the same thing, task text. So let's save this. Let's go back into our tasks, and let's import task from, and just /task, and we want to register it as a component. So components task, and then up here, instead of the H3 directly, we're going to do task, and then pass in, let's say :task, and pass that data in, which is going to be the individual object. You can see it's rendering the same thing because I still have the H3 here. Now I'm going to actually add, let's do a class of task here, and let's move this H3 in here, and then we'll have a paragraph with the task day. Okay, so I'll save that. That doesn't look too good. I need to add a little bit of styling here, so I'm just going to copy this real quick, and let's add style down here, and let's paste this in and save. All right, now I have a class of task, although what we could do is scope this, and you don't even need to add a class here. You could just add, instead of this, you could just have a div, because there's only one div in this component, and this styling is scoped. However, I would rather just have the class. And then we have this reminder class with the border. So basically what I want to do is have it so if the reminder is set to true, I want to have a green border on the side. And then we just have the H3 styling. Okay, so let's see, what do we want to do next? Let's add the delete button. So I do want to use Font Awesome and just add a delete icon here. So I'm going to go to cdnjs.com and just search for Font Awesome, and let's copy the link tag. And if you have any CDN that you want to include, you can just simply put it right in the public index.html file. So we're just going to put that, let's paste it in right there, and then we should be able to use Font Awesome. Okay, so in our task, let's see, we're going to put this within the H3, so we'll have an I tag with FAS, and the icon class is FA-times. So if we save that, you can see we have our icon. I do want to make it red, so I'm just going to go down here and say the Font Awesome class. Let's go ahead and make color red. Now before we get to the event and we click this and delete from our data, I want to just add the border if the reminder is set to true. So we have the entire task object coming into this component, so we have access to text.reminder. So where we have our class up here, because this is where I want to add the reminder class, I'm actually going to change this into a vbind, and we'll get rid of this for a second, and we're going to put in some brackets. And inside these brackets we can have a ternary, so let's do task.reminder, which is either going to be true or false. So we're saying if that is true, then let's add a class here called reminder, else then just nothing. Now we still want the task class to always be here. It's not, that's not a condition. So we can add in, we can just put a comma here, and then we can say we also want the task class. So now if I save that, you can see the first two have the green bar, the last one doesn't, because if we look at our data, the first two are true, the last one's false. If I were to change this to false, that's going to get rid of that green bar here. All right, and we're going to have a toggle function so that when we double click these, we can toggle that reminder. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to be able to click on these icons, these buttons here, and delete a task. And the issue we have is these buttons are in the task component, which is basically 2 levels deep, right? We have our main app component, then we have our tasks, and then in there we have our task, and that's where the button is. The data is in our main app component. Okay, this is basically our app level state. So you could use something like Vuex, but in an application this small, it's really not needed. We can basically just have actions or have events that emit up, so we can have functions in our main app file where we can manipulate this data. So let me show you what I mean. If we go to task.view and let's add an event on, let's see, so we're going to want to click this icon here. So we'll say at click, and then we're going to set that. There's a couple ways to do this. I'm going to show you kind of the longer way first, which is just to create a method here on delete. We do need the ID, so we can pass in the task ID like that. And then we can go down here, we can define methods, and we could say on delete, and that's going to take in the ID. And just to make sure that that works, let's console log the ID. Go ahead and open this up, and now if I click on here, you can see it's going to log the ID. Now, like I said, we need to basically emit upwards into the app.view, so we can do that by saying this dot and then money sign emit, and we're basically emitting like a custom event here. So we can call this whatever we want. I'm going to call it delete dash task. Using the hyphen is kind of the convention. And then we also want to pass the task ID along as a param, so we can just pass that in like that. Now the next level up is tasks, right? If I click this right now, wait, what's this? Oh, we don't want to pass task ID. We want to pass ID because that's what's getting passed in here. All right, but this isn't going to do anything yet because we need to essentially catch this emit at the next level up, which is inside of our task file. So here, let's say v-on, and actually we'll just do an at symbol here. So let's say at delete dash task. So when that happens, what do we want to do? Now the data is not here either, right? So it's up another level in app. So we want to essentially do the same thing we did here and emit an event with the ID. Now we could create a separate method like we just did, or we can just say up here money sign emit, and then pass in let's say delete dash task, and pass here the task dot ID, and that's going to emit up one level. So here where we have our tasks, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to say at delete dash task, and then we want to set that to a specific method. So we're going to call it delete task like that. Okay, and then let's go down here and we can create that method. Now we have access to this data, right? So we'll go right above created and say methods. And let's say delete task, and that's going to take in ID. And for now, let's just go ahead and console log here. I'll just console log task and then ID, so we know it's coming from here. All right, now if you see this warning here, this non-emits event listeners, that's because in tasks, since we're passing it up the way we are, we need to actually define emits, and that's just an array of events we're emitting. So let's say delete task, like that. That should get rid of that warning. Yeah. All right, so now if I click on one of these, you'll see I get task 1, task 2, task 3. So we're clicking on the button or the icon inside of the task.vue file or the component, and then it's firing this method off. Now we have direct access to this data, so we can, manipulate it how we want. In this case, we want to delete a task. So let's get rid of this, and let's set this dot tasks. And you don't want to directly filter these or directly push onto it or anything like that. You want to basically just reset it to something else. So we're going to reset it to this dot tasks dot filter because we're deleting here. So filter is a high order array method. Let me just close that up. And this takes in a function, and it's going to basically loop through, and we'll say for each task, what do we want to filter? So we'll say for each task, we want to take the task.id, and where that's not equal to the ID that's passed in right here, that's what we want back. We basically want everything back except the task with that ID because we're deleting that task, right? So let's save that, and let's go ahead and just, for this meeting at school, I'll click that. You'll see it goes away, And we could even add a confirm here since it's a delete, so we can say like if confirm and just say, are you sure? And we'll just move this up into here, just to give us a little warning if we're deleting. All right, now if I reload, obviously this is going to come back because we're not persisting it. We don't have any backend API that we're working with. We are going to be using something called JSON-Server in a little bit once we get the whole UI part of it done. But for now, it's just going to come right back when we reload. So the next thing I want to do is the toggle. I want to toggle the reminder, and that's going to be pretty much the same way we just did the delete. We're going to go into task.vue, and let's see. So I want this to be a double click on the div. Instead, right here we did a click on the icon, but here I'm going to add, let's say at dbl click, and we want to set that instead of creating a whole method like I did and then emitting down here, I'm going to do it the shorter way and just say emit, and in here we want to emit, we'll say toggle reminder, and we can pass task.id. And you know what, let's actually do the same here. Instead of using the method down here, this on delete, we'll just emit, and then here we'll say delete task, and then we could just get rid of this, and that should still work for the delete. Good. So for the reminder, let's see, we're double clicking, that's gonna emit toggle reminder, so we need to go one level up into tasks.vue, and we're going to add on to our task component here. Let's add at what do we call it, toggle dash reminder, and when that happens we're going to emit again. So we're going to emit toggle dash reminder, and we're going to pass task.id. And we just want to add toggle reminder to emits. All right, so that's going to emit upwards, and then this task's right here. Say toggle dash reminder, and we're going to set that to a method called toggle reminder. And then we can create that method down here. All right, and that's going to take in ID. And let's just make sure that that's being called. We'll just console log the ID real quick. Okay, and then we'll open that up, and if I double click, we get the ID. Good, so we know that this is being called. Now to toggle the reminder, excuse me, there's a few ways you can do this. We're going to use map. So let's take, we'll say this.tasks and set this, and because essentially we're updating this, right? We're updating a task by changing the reminder from either true to false or false to true. So let's say it equals this.tasks, so the entire array we want to map through. Map allows us to basically, you know, manipulate the array and return an array of whatever we want, really. And we want to return an array of updated tasks. So in this map, let's put an arrow function, and we're going to say for each task, let's do a conditional here. We want to check to see if the task.id is equal to the ID that's passed in. If it is, what we want to return is an array of objects where we have the initial task properties, so we can spread across the initial task, and then we want to change the reminder to whatever the opposite of the current task reminder. So if it's true, it'll get set to false. If it's false, it'll get set to true. Else, if it doesn't match the ID, we don't want to do anything. We're just going to return the initial task, right? So we'll save that. And now if I double click this second one, you'll see it removes it. Double click it again. So it's just changing that one value. All right, so we can now toggle reminder. So we have that done. I think the next thing I want to do is the add task. So we need to create that component with the form. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm just going to close that up for now. I can actually close all these except for app. And then in our components folder, let's create AddTask.Vue. And let's put our template in here. So this is going to be a form. I'm actually going to just copy the basic form real quick so I don't have to type all this out. Let's see if I can find it. All right, here it is. So I'm just going to grab the form, and there's nothing Vue related in this form. If you want to copy it, if you want to type it out, or you want to get the repo code, you can do that. Just a form with the class of add form. We have some form controls that wrap a label with an input. Then we have a day and time. So we have text, day and time, and then we have a set reminder, which is a checkbox. So I'm just going to save that, and actually let's add our script down here. And let's say export. All right, so I just want to display this form before we do anything. So in our app.vue, let's go ahead and bring this in. We'll just copy that down and set that to add task. And let's see, we want to add that here, add task, and then let's go up to the top, and we're going to put this right between the header and tasks. Oops, why'd I put a space there? All right, now the form looks like crap, so I do have some basic styling that I want to add, so let me grab that. Again, you can grab this from the repo. So in add task, let's add our style, and we'll add scoped. Paste that in. Okay, so that looks a lot better. Basically, we just have, you know, our add form, add some margin. We have form control, our labels, inputs, checkbox, and so on. Now, as far as the data goes here, when you have a form, you're usually going to have data for each field, right? So here we have a text field, we have a day field, right? So we have text, we have day, and we have reminder. So we're going to want to add that as data. So down in our JavaScript here, let's say data, which is a function, and it's going to return an object, and let's add the text. And you want to put whatever the default for the form here, which in this case is going to be nothing for text. And then we have day, which is going to be nothing. And then we have reminder, which is going to be false. Now, we want to bind these values to these inputs, and we can do that with a directive called vmodel. So let's go up top here let's go to the first input. and let's say v-model, and we're going to set that to the text field or the text data. Then we're going to go to this one here, let's say v-model, and we're going to set that to day, and down here for the reminder, v-model, set that to reminder. All right, so now we have a binding between these inputs and the data. So if I were to add a default value here like test and I save, you'll see test will show up here. Not only that, but if let's say the text data I want to output here like this, you'll see that it says test, and if I change this, we have a two-way binding going on here. So whatever I type in here, it's going to output here where I have my text output. Okay, I don't want to do that, but I just wanted to show you that we can do that. So let's just get rid of this. Okay, now we want to handle the submit. So obviously on the form we can add submit, and for that we're going to want to basically we're going to call a method here, and then we're going to do a couple things. We want to construct a new task, and then we're going to emit upwards into app.vue so that we can add a new task to our data. So here, let's just call this on submit, and let's go down here. So we have our data. Let's go right here, say methods, and on submit, and we're going to pass in our event object here and just prevent the default from happening. So prevent default, so it doesn't actually submit. And then let's do just some very simple validation. So we'll just do an if statement here, and we'll say if not this.text, because remember we can access that data with the this keyword. So if that's not there, then let's just do an alert and say please add a task, and then we'll just return. Okay, and then if that passes, let's construct the new task. So we'll say const new task, set that to an object. Now we want to have an ID, and since we're not dealing with any kind of back end yet, we're just going to do something very simple here and just round down. So math.floor, and then call math.random, and we'll do 100,000, so times 100,000. So that'll give us a random number. This isn't something you'd want to do in an actual app because you're going to get repeating IDs, but this is fine for this. So we have an ID. The text we're going to set to this.text, which is going to be whatever is in the form. All right, then we have the day. So we want the day, this.day. And then we have the reminder. So reminder will be this.reminder. We also want to clear the form. So let's say this.text equals nothing. Do the same with day. And then reminder is going to be false. Okay, and before we do anything, let's just console log here the new task. Okay, so we'll go over here, open up our console, and just type something in here. And you can see we have an ID, we have a day, a text, and a reminder. So now we just want to emit that upwards. So instead of console logging, let's say this dot emit, and let's call this, we'll just call this add-task and send the new task. All right, so now in our app file here, we can go and say on add-task, we want to call a function or a method called addTask. So now down here, we can, do what we've been doing with the delete and the reminder. I'm actually going to put the add above this. Say add task, and pass that in here. All right, so in order to add a task, this is going to be pretty easy. We can just say this.task, set it to an array where I'm going to spread across the current tasks and then just add a new one onto it. Okay, and that task actually comes in here. Okay, this is coming from here, this new task. All right, so that, I'm sorry, this should be this.tasks. All right, so let's save that. Let's try it out. So if I just say test1, Test 1. We'll set the reminder to true, save, and there we go. It gets added. Let's do test 2, save. And we can, of course, toggle. We can delete these. Good. All right, so we can close up the add task. And now what I want to do is make it so that when we click this add task, it toggles this form right here. It toggles the component. So inside of our app.vue, where we have our data, right under our task, let's create, let's say show add task. And this is going to be a Boolean value, which is going to be false by default. And I just want to show this component based on this true or false. So up here, where we're embedding the add task, we're going to create a div, and let's move that add task into that div. And we can use a conditional directive here. There's actually a couple we can use. We can do v-if. So if we do v-if show add task and I save, you'll see that that goes away. Another one we can use is vshow. So that's just basically, you know, if you could show something based on a true or false value, you'll see it's still gone. If I go down here and I change this to true, then it's going to show. Now I want it false by default, but I want to be able to click this button and toggle it. So in order to do that, let's go ahead and go into, we're actually going to open up header and button. Now the initial event comes from the button, right? Remember we have this on click. Right now it's just console logging. We don't want to do that. Let's get rid of that. We want to do this dot emit, and let's call this show dash add. Or show dash add dash, no, let's call it toggle add task. All right, now this is in the button component, so that's embedded in the header, so we have to basically catch that here and say at toggle dash show, what did I call it? Toggle add task. All right, so toggle add task, and when that fires off, we're going to want to then emit, and we're going to once again emit toggle dash add task. Okay, now in the let's see, so header, yeah, toggle that. So now the header here in the app.vue, we're going to do the same thing and say toggle dash add dash task, and when that fires off, we're going to call toggle add task. And let's create that down here. So toggle add task, that's going to be a function, and all we're going to do here is set that property, that show add task, to whatever it's not. So the opposite of this dot show add task. Okay, so let's go ahead and try it. We'll click, and there we go. So just to kind of recap, we click the button, right? The click event is right here. It calls this onClick method down here. We're emitting toggle add task, which then we're catching right here where we embed it. We're emitting it again from header, and then up here in header, we're setting it to fire this method off right here, which fires off here, and it just toggles it. If it's true, it'll set to false. If it's false, it'll set to true. Now another thing I'd like to do is change the look of the button. I'll change the text. If this is open, I want it to say close, and I want it to be red. So the button is in the header, right? So we have to pass in here. Actually, we'll go right here. No, we'll do it at the end. So we're going to use vbind and then pass in show add task, which is going to be equal to whatever show add task is. I mean, you might want to call this something different, but it's fine. It's just going to pass in whatever that true or false value is, and it's going to pass it in as this prop. So now if we go to header, we need to define that prop. So show add task, and that's going to be a Boolean. So now let's go up to the top here where we're embedding the button, and right now we're just passing in this static add task, but we can go ahead and change this to a vbind by adding a colon in front of it, and instead of just add task, let's put a condition here. So we'll say if show add task, which is the prop being passed in, the true or false. If that's true, then let's make the text, we'll have the text say close, right? Because if it's shown, we want it to say close. Else, then we want it to say, not show, add task. Right? So let's save that. Yeah, so now it says close. If I hit it, now we get add task. Now we can do the same thing with the color, so let's make that a vbind, and instead of just green, we'll say if show add task, then let's have it, so if it's shown, we want it to be red, else, then we want it to be green. Yeah. All right, now one thing I realize is in button, so button is, I want this to be reusable. So the on click here, I don't want the emit to be toggle add task, because if you want it to emit something different, you're not going to want this. So let's actually just call this button click. We'll just say button click like that. And then in the header, instead of excuse me, instead of catching this, we'll call this btn click, and that should still work. Yeah, because this is generic. You know, we want to be able to reuse this if we want. So I think button click makes more sense. All right, so that's pretty much it as far as the UI goes. I do want to implement something called JSON-Server to give us a fake backend to work with, so you can see what it's like to make requests. And you know, because in a real application, you're probably going to have some source of data, some API you're working with. But before we do that, I just want to show you how to build your static assets for deployment. So I'm just going to actually close everything up for now. And in the console here, let's cut this off with Control C, and we can run npm run build. And you'll see it's building for production. And it should create a folder called dist. You can see it just showed up right here. And this is what you would actually deploy. Okay, if you're building a single page app and the way we're building it, you're not going to deploy this stuff to your host. It's just this dist folder. And you could use something like Netlify or and pretty much anything, since it's just a front-end application. And we can test it out by using serve. That's what I like to use to kind of test this locally. So you can npm, or if you're on Mac, sudo npm install, excuse me, -g for global, and then serve. And this will we're just going to serve the dist folder. Okay, so we're not going to do anything with any of these other files or other folders. Let's go ahead and just run serve. Say serve -s, and let's serve the dist folder. So you can see it's running on localhost 5000. So if I were to open up HTTP localhost port 5000, there it is. Now 8080, if I go back over here, that's the dev server. That's off. That's not running anymore. These are our files that are in the dist folder, and we should be able to add tasks. Should be able to delete them, toggle this. So you can see that it's working. So this is how it would work if you were to deploy it to to a production server. So I just wanted to do that real quick. Now, before I start the dev server back up, I'm going to install something called JSON-Server. So let's say npm install JSON-Server. And just to show you what this is, let's say JSON-Server. And we'll go ahead and just make this a little bigger. So it's a full fake REST API, and we don't have to code anything. Basically, we just have a JSON file that we can create. Let me see what it shows here. Yeah, so we create a db.json file, and we can put any data we want. In our case, it's going to be tasks, but it could be anything. And you can run the server like this, JSON server, watch your file, and it'll start on a specific port. And you can make not only GET requests to get the data, but you can also post to update, post to create, put to update, patch to update, and delete to delete. All right, so it's really cool. You can also do filtering and pagination. It's one of my favorite tools to work with. So let's go ahead and now start our server back up. So npm run. Actually, before we do that, let's not do that just yet. In our package.json, let's create a script to run JSON server. So let's see. We have npm serve. We'll just call this server. Might be a little confusing because we have serve and server. So we'll do JSON. Yeah, we'll do JSON, I guess. So npm run JSON. And what we want that to do is to run JSON server. So JSON-server --watch. And we want to watch a file called db.json, which we'll create in a minute. And I just want to run that on port 5000. So I'm going to add the flag --port, set that to 5000. Okay, so basically that will run our backend. Well, we can call this backend. Okay, now the JSON file, let's create that. That's going to be in the root called db.json. And let me just grab the data for this. It's just going to be the same, same stuff we've been working with, tasks, ID. And what's great about this JSON server is if you create a new item, a new task, it'll actually add the ID for you. So let's save this file. And now we should be able to run npm run backend, and it'll run our REST API, our server. So let's say npm run backend. Okay, localhost 5000, and we can even go, we can go over here and say localhost 5000. Now it's going to be, let's see, that's not going to give us anything. We want to go to /, I think we just go to /tasks. Yeah. So there we go. So it's serving this data. And like I said, it's not just GET requests. We could make a POST request to add and update and all that too. So our backend is running. Let's open up a new tab here and let's run npm run serve, which is our Vue dev server. So I'm just going to reload this. Good. So now that we have a backend, let's go to our source app.vue. And let's see, basically we're just going to kind of change this stuff up so that we're not only dealing with the UI, but we're also dealing with, our back end. So initially we just have our tasks just hard-coded right here. We have our created lifecycle. We're setting this .task to a hard-coded array. So I don't want to do that. I want to fetch from the back end. So in our methods, right under toggle reminder, I'm going to say fetch tasks. And we're going to make this async because we're using async await with fetch. So let's say const response, set that to await on the fetch API. We want to fetch from HTTP localhost port 5000 /tasks. You saw the data that gave us in the browser. And then let's say const data, set that to await res.json. And then we just want to return the data. And instead of this here, like hard coding this array, let's replace the array. So we're going to replace that with this dot fetch tasks. Okay, actually this is going to return a promise, so we have to await, and we can make this async. So we'll save. Now it's not going to look any different, but if we were to look in the network tab here and reload, actually you can't really see it here, but let me just stretch this out a little. So let's see, let's actually reload that. So tasks, bring this up a little bit. So tasks, and you can see right here, we're getting this back from the server. We made a GET request to 5000 tasks, 200 response, and that's our response. And I could change the data directly in the db.json if I wanted to. Like instead of meeting at school, we could say meeting with boss. And if I save that and we refetch, you'll see meeting with boss. So the next thing that I want to do, let's see, we fetched the data. Let's also create a function just to fetch a specific task, because we're going to need that in order to update later on. So we can actually just copy this, paste that in, change it to fetch task, which takes in an ID, and let's trade these single quotes for backticks so that we can say task slash and then put in the ID, and we'll just return the data. So that will just fetch a single task. Now, I think that we should look into using a proxy, because typing this, localhost 5000 out, we're not going to want to do that. And when we go into production, it's just going to be like something like API/tasks, right? So let's actually change this to both of these to API/tasks. Now, if I save this, it's not going to work because that doesn't mean anything. With Vue.js, though, we can add a proxy with a config file. So if we go in the root here and create a new file called vue.config.js, and here we can module.exports, and then we can add this dev server, and inside here we can add a proxy. And you can set all kinds of rules. Basically what I want to do is set it so if we hit /API/anything, then we're hitting localhost 5000/anything. So I'm actually going to just copy these rules real quick and paste these in. All right, so essentially we'll be able to just do what I have here, API/tasks, and that's going to hit localhost 5000/tasks. Okay, only when we run the dev server, not in production. So let's save that, and I think we have to restart the server for that to work. Yeah, probably. So let's, this is the Vue dev server. I'm just going to cut that off and restart that. And let's reload, and there we go. So now we no longer have to do that, localhost 5000. We can just do API/whatever. So now let's go ahead and do the add task, because right now we just add them to the UI. Like if I add something here, it gets added to the UI, but I reload and it's gone. It's not being persisted. So right here we have add task. Let's make this asynchronous, and we're going to keep this here, but above it we want to make our request. So response, set that to await fetch, and we want to fetch. This is going to be API/tasks, but it needs to be a post request, not a get request. So we need to pass in a second options parameter or argument, and let's set method to post. And since we're sending data, we want to do headers, and we want to set the content dash type. We want to set that to JSON or application/JSON, and then the body is the data that we're sending, and we want to just wrap that in JSON.stringify. Okay, and the data we're sending is the task that's coming in here. Okay, now for the response, let's say const data and set that to await the response.json. That'll give us the task back, the new task, which then we can just add down here. So we're just setting this .task to whatever is already there plus the new one that was just added. So let's save that, and let's say add task. Let's say go to dentist on March 10th at 3 p.m. Okay, so that didn't work. Let's see what got. So it added the ID. It just didn't get the data. So JSON.stringify. Oh, I put the body in the headers. Dumb. All right, let's put that here, and let's just delete this. Okay, so this should work now. Dentist appointment, March 10th at 3 p.m. Set reminder and save. All right, so it made the request, and you can see it actually got added. It added an ID, and if I reload, it should still be there. Good. Now, one thing that we don't have to do now is put an ID ourselves, because if you remember in the, let's see, components add task, remember we added this ID. We don't want to do that anymore because the ID gets added by JSON server, so we can get rid of that. Actually, you know what? I'll just we'll just comment that out. All right, so now let's do the delete. So, because I can delete from the UI, right? But if I reload, it's still there because we didn't persist the delete. So down where we have our delete, let's make that asynchronous. And let's see, we'll just go, yeah, we'll go in here. And let's make our request. So I'm going to set that to await fetch. And then we're going to fetch, let's see, it's going to be API /tasks/ and then we want the ID, so let's actually change these to backticks and pass in the ID, and this needs to be a delete request, so we're going to add the method of delete. Alright, and then what we're going to do is check the status, because we want to make sure it's deleted off the server. So we'll say, we'll put a ternary here and say if res.status is equal to 200, then let's filter it, right? So we're going to do, I'm just going to grab this, we're going to cut that, and inside parentheses here we'll paste that in. So we'll filter it, we'll delete it. Else, if it's not 200 and there's some kind of error, we'll just go ahead and alert and say error deleting task. Okay, now this filter right here, I just want to check this real quick. So this dot task equals this dot task filter. We want to match task ID. Yeah, so that should be fine. So let's try that out. We'll save. And if I delete dentist appointment, it gets deleted from the UI. If I reload, it's gone. And your JSON server console should show you all of the you know, requests that you're making or that you're taking in. So here's our get, here's our posts, our delete. Every time I reload, it's going to make a get request. All right, now let's see, what do we have left to do? So we want to do the toggle, because right now I can toggle the reminder, but it's not going to stick, right? We need to actually make an update. So let's go down to our toggle reminder, make that async, and let's do, so we're going to have to do a couple things here. One, I'm going to just set a variable called task to toggle, because we want to fetch that specific task. Remember, I created that fetch task method. I'm going to await this dot fetch task, and we're going to pass in, let's close this up. We're going to pass in the ID that's passed into toggle reminder. So that'll get the actual task we want to toggle. Now let's create a variable here called update or UPD task and set that to an object, and we want to spread across the task to toggle, so basically what we get back, and then we want to change the reminder to whatever the opposite of that is. So the opposite of task to toggle dot reminder. Now all this does is it puts this in a variable. We haven't made the request yet, so now let's do that. So const res and set that to await fetch. And we want to pass in here some backticks, API /tasks/ and then the ID. And this is going to be a put request. So let's pass in here our method, which is going to be put, because put is for our updates. And then headers. And we want to add content-type of application /JSON, and then for the body, make sure you don't do it in the headers. So the body is going to be, let's say, JSON.stringify, and we want to pass in here the updated task. All right, so then we'll get the response back, which will be the updated task. And then the only thing we want to change down here is, instead of setting the reminder to the opposite of task reminder, we want to set it to whatever the data coming back, which is the the updated task. We want to set it to the reminder value of that. So let's save. And food shopping, I'll double click. Okay, so it looks like that's not working. Let's see. Oh, I didn't. It's been a long video. We need to get the data back, so await res.json. There we go. Food shopping. Let's toggle. If I reload, it's gone. Toggle it again. Reload. It's still there. All right, good. So we basically have a CRUD application. We can't update the title and the day. I mean, you can implement that if you want, but this should give you a pretty good idea of how to do that and how to work with a backend. All right, now the last thing I want to do is show you how to implement the Vue router. Now, like I said earlier, when you're using the CLI, you definitely want to choose the router option if you plan on using the router rather than doing it this way. But I didn't want to, I basically just wanted to show you how to do all this stuff first and then deal with routing. So we're just manually setting the router up. But again, the CLI gives you the option to just basically set this up by default. So I want to go to my Vue, my front end, my Vue JS terminal here, and just cut this off for a second, and then npm install. And at this point, we're going to install router, or Vue-router at next, which will give us the latest version of the router. So at this point in time, if you're using Vue version 3, you need to make sure you add this at next. So let's install that. Okay, then we'll run our serve, npm run serve again. Okay. So now there's a bunch of things that we have to do. Basically, I just want to have a home page, which is going to be what you're looking at now with these multiple components, and then also an about page that just shows like the version of the app. And we'll have a footer with a link. So let's first, before we even get into the router, let's create a new component called footer.view. And I mean, this is going to be pretty simple. We're just gonna create a template, and in here let's use a footer tag, and we'll put a paragraph here. We'll say copyright 2021, and then I just want to have a link to the about page. So for now I'm going to use an A tag. This isn't what we should do, but just for now, I'm going to use this, and this is going to go to /about, and we'll just say about, and then let's add a little bit of styling here. So we'll say style scoped, and let's change the color of the link to 333, and then for the footer, let's just do a margin top 30 pixels and a text align center. Okay, and then we'll bring that into our app.vue. So let's see, I'm just gonna copy the header down and put in the footer, and then we're gonna embed that up here at the bottom. So footer. We need to register it. That's right. So components, say footer, and there we go. So you have a simple footer. Now if I click on about, it doesn't do anything. I mean, it goes to that URL, but it's the same. We're looking at the same thing, right? So to implement the router, there's a few things we need to do. First, we need to create, in our source folder, we need to create a new folder called router. And the CLI, again, will do this for you if you choose that option. Inside here, we're going to have an index.js, Okay, so we have router, and then inside we have index.js. And we want to import from the Vue router. We're going to import create router. And there's a few different ways to do this. We can use like the hash router. We're going to use the standard HTML5 push state, and that's with create web history. So we want to bring that in as well. And then any, I should say, views that we want to bring in. A view, not VUE, but view, is basically a page. So it's a Vue component, but as a page. So we're going to have an about component, but it's going to be a view. So it's going to go in a separate folder, right? So I'm going to go in source, and let's create a folder called views. And inside views, let's create a file called about.vue, VUE. And we'll just have a template. And just for right now, we'll just say h1 about, like that. Now, I want this to be a specific route. Like if I go to /about, this is the component or the view that I want to show. So I need to import that into this file. So import about from, and it's going to be up one level in views and then about. Okay. Now we want to create an array of routes. So we'll set this to an array, and each route is going to be an object with a path. So this I want to be /about, and then we'll give this a name of about, and then the component that we want to render, which is about, which I just brought in. So every route, every page, or I should say view, everything that's in this folder, you want to bring in here and then add to your router. Okay, now down here we want to define our router with the create router function that we brought in, which takes in an object with a history property, which we're going to pass in create web history, and this takes in the base URL, which we can do process.env.base_URL, and then it also takes in our routes array. Okay, and then we just need to export default router. So this is our route file. Now in order to use the router, we actually have to go to our main.js, the entry point, and import that router file that we just created. So it's going to be from /router, and then we just want to use it by saying create app, and then just pass in a .use here like that, and pass in our router, and that will use the router. Now if I click on this about, it goes to /about, but we don't see anything here. That's because in our app.view we have to show the router view somewhere. So I mean, ultimately I want the header and the footer on every page. These two components I'm going to want on just the home page, but for now we're just going to leave them and put in router-view. Yeah, we should be able to do that. And now if I save, you'll see we have about. Now if I go to the home page, we don't see that. It's only on that route. Now we're seeing the rest of this stuff because it's just it's still embedded here, right? It's not set to a specific page, a specific route. So we're going to want to do that. But before we do, you see how when I go to the about page, it refreshes the page. See right here, if you watch the favicon, we don't want that to happen. And the reason that's happening is because in the footer, when we link to that about, we're using an href, and we don't want to do that. What we want to use is router link instead. So we're going to change the a tag to a router-link tag and change href to 2, like that. So that way, if we click on about, let's go back. We click on about, you'll see it's just automatic, right? There's no reloading or anything like that. So you want to make sure you use router link. Now on the about page, let's just put, like, we already have the title and the header, so we'll just put an h3 and let's say version 1.0.0, and then let's have a router link to go back. So we'll have 2, and that's going to go to / and we'll say go back. like that. Okay, so now we can go back and forth. Okay, so what we need to do now, we can close up about and footer. We want to create a new route so that we can see the AddTask component and the tasks on the home page, right, or the home route. So in the index.js of our routes, let's we'll just copy that. So the path for this is going to be just slash. The name is going to be home, and the component is going to be home. And we haven't created that yet, but I'm going to bring it in. So home, home, and we're going to get an error because that doesn't exist yet. So in views, not in components, but in the views folder, we'll create home.view. And we're basically going to take a bunch of stuff from just the app.view and put it into the home. So let's create a template here, and let's go to our app.view, and we want to grab, let's see, we want to grab this, so the add task with the conditional and the tasks, and we're going to cut that out. And we're going to put that in here, okay, in the home. Then for, let's see, script. So for the script, we're going to want to, of course, we need to bring in add task and tasks. So we can just grab that. We'll close that up. We'll just grab those here. So these two imports, we're going to cut those and put those into here. And this is why I'd say, you know, do this from the beginning with the CLI, because it would already create this home page for you and you could work with it instead of having to move stuff around like this. But again, I wanted to do this last. Now here we want to export default, and let's say name home, and then components. So components, we want task and add task, and then we can get rid of that here, task and add task. So basically the only components you want in your app.view are ones you want on every page, such as the header and footer. Now we also want our tasks data. That's also going to be in the home page, so we can get rid of that, and let's put that here. So we want data and tasks, initialize that with an empty array. We're going to want all of this other stuff as well. I mean, the only thing we really want in the app.view as far as methods is going to be the toggle add task. So everything else, all these other methods from add task down to even the created. Actually, you know what, let's just copy the entire methods and created. So from here, I know this is a little confusing. I hate doing this kind of stuff in a tutorial. But I'm going to grab the methods and created, copy them, and then put them here in home. Okay, but we don't need in home this here, toggle add task. We're going to get rid of that. Okay, and then here we can get rid of everything. Let's see, we'll get rid of the created. And then in the methods, we're going to get rid of everything except the first one, which is, where is it? Toggle add task. So we can get rid of all the other methods. All right, so this app.view is, you know, cleaning up. So I'm going to save that, and everything's going to disappear for now. But let's go back to home and save that. And let's see, what am I missing here? So this should load when we go to the home page. Can't resolve, add task. Okay, so the path has changed. So before we were in the components folder, now we're in the views folder because we're in this home.view. So we just have to go up one level for these. let's see, what else are we missing here? Reference error, task is not defined. Task is not defined. Home.view. Components to, oh, wait a minute. Why do I have task? That should be tasks. The data option must be a function. Did I actually put data as an object? I did. So right here, I made this stupid mistake. So let's set that, and then we want to return an object and set tasks to an empty array. All right, so we're getting there. So we're able to see this stuff. Now this isn't going to work just yet, and I'll show you why in a second, but we should see our task here. We can toggle. Now show add task was accessed during render, but is not defined on the instance. So if we go to app.view, we have show add task. Let's see, we're passing that into the header. Now we need that show add task. We need that to get passed into our home page, right? Because we're using that. Where are we using that? Right here. We're using that to show the add task form. Now we can actually pass in to router view. We can pass in props. So let's go ahead and say show add task, and we're going to set that to, actually we need to bind it, so like that, and then show add task. Right, so we can pass that in, and then we can catch that as a prop in our home. So let's add this here, say props, and for, say, show add task, that's going to be a Boolean. Save that, and there we go. All right, so I mean that actually took me a while to figure out when I was first dealing with this, how to basically pass a value from our main app file into, you know, a view, because it's not just a regular component, but you can pass props in to the actual router view. Okay, and we could catch it in any of our pages or any of our view components. So I hope that makes sense. Now I just want to test everything out, so we'll try to add a task. Let's say test. Okay, so that gets added. I reload, it's still there. I can toggle it, I can delete it, still there. I can go to the about page, and now obviously on the about page we're not seeing our other components, because in our app.view we just simply have our router view and we have the header and footer. So any other components that you would want to show on every page, you could just put right in here. And you notice we go back and forth very smoothly. It doesn't reload or anything because we're using the view router. Now the last thing that I want to do is limit this button here to only the home page, because if I go to about, there's no sense in having this button here. It's not going to show the add task component. So let's go to our header component. So header.view, and we're going to use something called the computed property, which is basically used for reactivity. If you want to do something like, let's say, a simple example would be if you had a first name and a last name piece of data, and you wanted to combine them to make a full name, you could do that within the computed property. So we're going to say computed, and in here I'm going to have a function called, we'll just call this homepage, and then we want to do an if statement. Now we have access to this dot money sign route, and we can get the path. I didn't mention this. We also have access to this dot router, and we could, let's say we wanted to redirect programmatically, we could do push. There's other methods as well, but we just want to get the path here. So it's this dot money sign route dot path. So we'll say if that is equal to just slash, meaning it's on the home page, then let's go ahead and return true. and then we'll say else will return false. And then that way we can go up here, and where we have our button, we can use a conditional. So right in here we can just say v-show, and we can set that to home page. So I'll go ahead and save that, and now it's, it's still on the home page. If I go to about, it's not there. Okay, and if we create any other routes, it's not going to be there. It's only going to show on the home page, which is what we want. And then one more thing, back a little while ago when we did this conditional here for add task, I wrapped it in v-show. We don't actually have to do that. I used it like a v-if. We could actually just put it right in here and then get rid of the div around it, which is a bit cleaner. So if we do that, it should work the same way. You'll see it still toggles. Okay, it's not on the about page, and that's it. All right, so I know this video is kind of long, but hopefully you learned, at least the fundamentals of Vue.js, and you can start building things on your own. So that's it, guys. Thanks so much for watching. I appreciate it, and I'll see you next time.